sure we leave edit points. So welcome everyone to today's technical discussion about the Digital Farm Wallet project. This is an overview of the project to date from Sharon Lyon, the project manager, and then we'll have a brief overview by Richard Bergquist from Datacom, who'll just give us some context for the Digital Farm Wallet, and then we'll have Ian Robb, who will talk about a deployment of Microsoft Entra using decentralized identity from Microsoft's new offering, External ID. And we will be publishing this on YouTube. So just ensure that if you do ask a question, make sure that you ask good open-ended questions so people can comment. Now, this is an interactive workshop, so really keen to get feedback. This is a technical how-to. So if you've got any questions, put them in the chat column. You can send us an email afterwards. As I said, we will be recording this. We'll be placing links on the website so that you can circulate it to other parties inside your respective organisations. But our thanks to MPI for their support in the Digital Farm Wallet project. And I'd like to hand over now to Sharon, who's the project manager. Sharon,
Thank you, Chris.
Over to you.
Thank you very much. And welcome everyone. For those of you who were at our Friday session, this is going to be a little bit of a repeat, but it's not all of the same slides. It's just the first couple. But just for those who may not have had as much to do with our project along the way, I'm just going to give a brief overview from a kind of contextual point of view and then hand over. But as Chris said, this is really a technical workshop. Really would be great if you could engage. We had at the end of last year, December, and the beginning of this year, February, we had a technical workshop with our previous technology stack. This technical workshop is now focused on the MS Entra work stack. So I'm just going to run you very, very quickly through the project to date. So we started off actually pre-Digital Farm Wallet pilot project. We had an SFFF funded project called the Digital FEP project. And that looked at, we had the lofty idea of standardizing on an FEP when FEP was still, hadn't been superseded by freshwater farm plans. And what we found, we did a very big farm engagement survey and looked at the data interoperability, the data pain points. And from that, we realized, well, we can't standardize on a digital FEP because it's different for different regions, for different farming, etc. So what we wanted to do was say, how do we make the farmer's life easier by allowing the farmer to have permission-based and their own kind of self-sovereign perspective of pieces of data, which then became verifiable credentials or digital proofs, that they could then choose to share with whomever they needed to, when they needed to. So that was very much a conceptual project. And then that was based on this, and you're going to talk a lot about this, so I'm not going to dwell on that. And we looked at the 3 key areas. Identity is very important. Richard's going to be talking a lot about that. Location, and then whatever the critical control points are, whether it's greenhouse gas, whether it's deforestation proofs, anything like that. And we delved a lot into decentralization, which is what Trust Alliance is all about, and the fact that you can create an identity for anything, which was really interesting. And we had a look at, well, what is the state of play at that point in time? And it's still true now, farm data being held in private and public silos, the age-old problem of farm identity and no kind of centralized or universally agreed farm identity or data schema, and the fact that farm data, we call it the problem of multiple sources of farm data on farm, never mind coming into the farm, and that data being needed to be used in different ways. So the farmer ends up being a kind of data manager in the middle. And trust, and I'm not going to steal Richard's thunder, he's going to talk all about trust. And then just after that project, we got awarded an IFP project from MPI to actually then turn this into reality, to look at a prototype based on our conceptual studies that we'd come up with from the DFEP. And that's where the Digital Farm Wallet pilot project was born. And this was to actually say, we've spoken about it, we've talked a lot about concepts. They're quite difficult concepts because they were kind of new at that point to New Zealand. But how can we show this? How can we make it practical for the farmers? Really, really putting the farmers in the middle of this and making it, what is the value proposition for all the stakeholders? So we kicked off this project, for those of you who are in the room, at the beginning of 23. We kicked it off in 23 with our members, and we said, this is what we're going to be doing. Please jump on board because we need participants. And we got our pilot participants on board. I'll show you that. I think I've got a slide coming up on that. And our first milestone was to get a demo or a proof of concept ready for Primary Industries event, the Federated Farmers thing, which was at the beginning of July that year. So we did a technology due diligence. We, at that point in time, chose Indicio and Anonymy, and two different technology stacks that either one could have done the job in terms of what we are looking for, digital wallet and verifiable credentials, but we wanted them to be interoperable. So we said, you guys do half and you guys do half, and we'll see how that works out. So that was actually also one of the milestones that we wanted to see. And after the PINS event, where it went really well, the prototype, we then went out to the farmers and showed them the Digital Farm Wallet. In terms of what we did after that, we went into a super user round with Silver Fern Farms, where we put actual farm data just for a couple of farms so they could see it, because what we'd learned from the farmer focus group is that they were really keen to see their data. It was a simulated thing, but the farmers were downloading their wallet, and they were working with test data at that point, but they were getting actual verifiable credentials into their own wallets. Where we are now is that around about this time, we realized, or Chris realized, that MS Entra had kind of become an option, a viable option, and we introduced a third technology stack, which was MS Entra. With Richard's help and with Backstory's help, we created the same prototype, but on the MS Entra technology stack. And that's what we'll be looking at today. And then we are, from a project point of view, rounding off the project with we now have a productionization plan. We say there are no more barriers to entry. We've got a free, if you're under 50,000, creating a business case. This is your MS Entra stack that you can use. And we've got a how-to guide, and we've got these sessions. So it really has become really a viable option now to implement verifiable credentials. And if you want to put it in a wallet, Authenticator is there, or if you want to send it directly to an app, because as an agribusiness you already have an app, that is also very, very feasible and possible. And Chris, do you want me to go through what we did here, or we can cut it here?
It might be useful to give people a context of the previous tech stack, which was an offshore offering using an off-the-shelf technology solution that wasn't available, and now we've pivoted, given Entra's availability, to using something onshore.
Perfect. So exactly what Chris has said. There was a lot of due diligence that went into this, and the two offshore service providers or technology providers were Anonymy and Indicio. And they created this prototype. This was initially for the PINS demo and then for the farmer focus group. So it was around deploying issue and verifying agent services, credentials, the schemas, and then the delivery of the wallet, and then the actual proof of concept that could work together. This is a little bit, and this is a technical. I did show this on Friday, but we whizzed over it. Just so that you've got a kind of like before and an after. This was our architecture. We had the cloud and the verifying agents in the cloud, issue and verify agents from Indicio, and we had the wallet from Anonymy working together because they were based on the same standards. that was our point, is not only to have data interoperability, but also to have vendor interoperability, so we would not have lock-in.
And I've just pasted into chat links to those two websites that you can see. Principally, this was Hyperledger using a sovereign blockchain running underneath the Digital Farm wallet. We got it operational, but essentially it was using offshore technology with a US and Australian provider who worked together to deploy this. Back to you, Sharon.
Thank you. And then just a little bit in terms of what we were doing as opposed to how we were doing it. We had MyEnviro, Balance, Federated Farmers with help from Eagle and Overseer from our TANZ member base as issuers. So we went in and we simulated a MyEnviro portal and taking a verifiable credential that was greenhouse gas from MyEnviro portal and putting it onto a farmer's wallet. The same for Balance. We had two there. I'll walk you through those as we go through. Just before we get there, this is quite interesting. At the same time, we're talking a lot about the Digital Services Trust Framework Act, which is, I think it looks like coming to fruition now. And we were making sure that we were very much aligned with what they were doing. And also, Chris was inputting things because initially they were very much at an individual level and we were dealing at an enterprise level. Chris, I don't know if you want to say anything about this.
Yeah, so this was the Digital Trust Framework Act is now in draft regulation. The Act's been put into place last year. The Trust Framework regulations and rules are in draft. It will be come out later in the year so organisations can become accredited to it. What we've done is make sure that the MS Entra pilot project lines up with the credential requirements and architectural requirements of the Digital Trust Framework Act. The Hyperledger is aligned with W3C and the international protocols, but the Microsoft credential model is simpler and easier to deploy and also aligns neatly with the Digital Trust Framework rules and regulations. Back to you, Sharon.
Thanks, Chris. And so what, when we went out to the farmers, these are some of the slides that we shared with them. It was really, really interesting. We got over 200 plus farmers that we got the Digital Farm Wallet loaded. They had them on their phones and they ran through the simulated. I'll show you what I mean. We had a farm dashboard where they actually went into a simulated MyEnviro portal, a simulated Federated Farmers portal, and actually created their own verifiable credentials. But this was basically the data problem. Multiple sources of information, farmer sitting in the middle, and then needing to have those same or similar pieces of information for multiple reasons. And we broadly talked about the 3 Bs, the banks, the buyers, and the beehive from a compliance point of view. So that was a problem statement. I'm going to whiz through this because you guys understand all of this, but had to explain, if you can think about the farmers, we had people who didn't really understand what we were talking about. So we used the physical wallet and how that is very similar to the digital wallet, your credentials and your attributes that you hold in your physical wallet, and how we're talking about holding it from a digital perspective as a verifiable credential. And the fact that probably all of us have touched a verifiable credential, even if we haven't called it a verifiable credential, in terms of if we had the vaccine passport for COVID or electronic travel documents. And then we had to do a lot of things about, well, what is Trust Alliance? Because we're kind of like, are you another mobile app provider? Are you trying to do a data storage solution or aggregate data across farm, across all the ecosystem? And really the bottom line is we were about enabling secure and permission sharing of key, critical, and or strategic data. So this is not a mechanism for all data sharing. And I was very careful to, I gave them an example of petty cash, bank account, and vault in the same way the vault is where you keep your really precious and things that you need to keep secure. That is what we're talking about from a wallet. It's the stuff that you need to prove hasn't been tampered with, that you want to be able to protect and share when needed from a farmer's perspective. So that was it, putting the farmer in the middle, but not making him a data manager or data expert or an IT expert, but being able to have sovereignty over their own data. Just a little bit about this, because it will feed into what you're seeing today. There was a QR code that established a once-off connection with the issuers that we had. We had a really special verifiable credential, the Farm ID, which we simulated going into the Federated Farmers Portal, and from the membership record, it created a Federated Farmers ID, and we are then used that to log into the other systems, which the farmers actually loved. So those are the QR codes that we used, and this was the farm dashboard. So we got the farmer, or whoever we did this dashboard, and we could have done it with people on the call. We got them to run this URL on their laptop, download the phone from the App Store, download the wallet onto their phone from the App Store, and then actually run through this, simulating a day in the life of a farmer. So logging in, get your farm ID, log into your portal, or log into your MyEnviro portal, and create your verifiable credential on your phone. So for example, logging into your MyEnviro or logging into your MyBalance, and we used a kind of like a federated login, use it similar to a Facebook or a LinkedIn, but using this Farm ID credential as an aside, but the farmers loved it. So this was on the left-hand side was the screen on their laptop. That was their logging into their screen. It's an actual MyEnviro screen. It's obviously been skinned, and there was a new button there called Issue GHG Credential. They clicked on that, and they actually got the credential on their phone. This was a much better conversation starter to say, is this going to work for you? Because they really could understand what that was all about. Similarly, logging into MyBalance, the proxy portal, they had two buttons there, get boundary ID, get in-cap credential, and then that would be downloaded onto their phone as a verifiable credential. So we could say, go into your wallet, you can see you can't change it. The point is not to log it, to have it as a verifiable credential or piece of data on your wallet, in your wallet on your phone, so that the farmer can change it, because then it's not immutable. But they could actually see that they could then do stuff with it. And the rest of the demonstration was with all of these verifiable credentials that we used. We actually aggregated them, amalgamated them, and sent it through to a simulated regional council as a freshwater farm plan, or part of a freshwater farm plan. Yeah, and Chris, this is just some of the stats, just to round it off. How many people? You can see we've reached out and touched a lot of people. Just in terms of the farmer focus group, we could obviously track up to a certain point the number of wallets downloaded, the number of participants, and this was all obviously fed back to MPI in terms of milestones. This was our stakeholder engagement dashboard that got updated regularly, so we could see the movement and the traction. And we have some excellent, this is just an example of feedback. We got feedback from the people that we were talking to, good constructive feedback, really positive. And this one, when can we have this? That was the one. And the other one was, who's going to use it? Will the regional councils accept it? Otherwise, it's great to have it sitting in my wallet. It's stunning, can understand the process, but what is the value proposition? Who wants to use it? And that's when we realize the value proposition is sitting with the relying party. So when the relying party says, I want this piece of data and I want it in this format, this is when this becomes absolutely necessary. Just some more quotes. And these are the benefits. So critical credentials and reuse of them, so that the farmer doesn't have to become a data manager. And if you are an exporter, ensuring international market access, we all see what's happening with the EU, and that's going to become really enforceable and have an impact here as well. And then, as I say, just to round this off, we did then go to super user focus group with Silver Fern Farms, where we actually had actual data. The other ones were test data, actual data, and then we just did this, and I know this makes Chris mad, because this is not how you do greenhouse gas or emissions, but this is just to show that from a relying party point of view, once you've got your farmers or your customer, your suppliers feeding you information from verifiable credential, you can ingest it and do something with it for different, and there are lots of different use cases. That was just to prove that point. Yep.
So thank you, Sharon, for that. I'm just keeping an eye on the clock. Look, overwhelming feedback from the farming community was very positive, very supportive. All of them saw a need for it, and that was from across the country. So barriers for adoption from the farmers themselves, there isn't a lot. We walked them through it. They're all comfortable using it on their cell phones. We actually deployed the wallet, so it was a non-custodial digital wallet on their cell phones, and I've still got it on mine as well with dummy data in it. They went, good, can we use it? We got it working with a super user group of their actual farm data. Now what we're looking at is the next step is, how do we get the agribusiness tech stacks adopting this type of technology? So we see the next step is the agribusiness tech stacks getting able to issue or rely on verifiable credentials. The good news is you have the tech. The good news is it's really low cost. And the good news is there's very little barriers for deploying it. It's about a strategic decision at a management level whether to switch the stuff on or not. Richard's going to give us now, Richard Bergquist from Datacom, and a shout out to Datacom and their support. And Richard's been an invaluable advisor in the background as we've been running along. So Richard's just going to give us a brief snapshot of why we're actually doing this, and technically what's driving this, and sort of what's happening internationally and the rate and what's actually happening technology-wise. Over to you, Richard.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'm just loading the presentation. Hopefully you can start to see it now. Thumbs up if you can. Cool. So what I'm going to give a bit of a rundown is why digital wallets. With identity, we're always on to the next biggest and greatest thing. But I wanted to share with you what is the thinking behind digital wallets, and why have we evolved in the state, and why are they considered good progress, essentially. Because to be fair, in the identity space and generally in the internet, one of the two hardest things is really tying down identity and security. So you need security for protection, and you need identity as an enabler. And in the history of the internet, identity and security have had, to be fair, a bit of a fraught curve, because they're actually, what they're underpinned by is a even more nebulous concept called trust. And achieving trust over the internet is hard. But with trust, you can prove who people are, so you can drive identity use cases. And where you don't have trust, zero trust, you can drive security models. So trust is really important, but it's really hard to achieve. So there's been after success and failures. And what I'm going to do is just take a bit of a tiptoe through some of the, I guess, major milestones along the way that shows the thinking of where we got to today. First stop is, I guess, back in the early 2000s when we really started to socialize and spend on the internet, e-commerce. Early days, .com era, to be honest, a bit of the Wild West when it came to security. Lots of random things happened. We got introduced the concept of that identity could be stolen, databases of our personal information could be hijacked. Around that era, in those sort of mid 2000s, one of the heroes, I guess, of the story is the identity security standards bodies really sort of stood in. They started to define ways to authenticate, ways to share data, ways to secure data, and this was the way. One of the early examples of that is SAML, for example, which has set up the federation standard. So they really started to, I guess, act as the good cop in the story, where they started to promote ways for people to do things in a trusted way. Fast forward into another decade, into 2010, what we saw is the standards actually provided a foundation, almost a platform, to build think with a cloud. So basically you could commoditize compute into the cloud using the standards that were built upon in the decade before. You could use those standards to actually install a data center for the internet. One of the big concerns was, while there was lots of adopters, there were slow movers, and basically because cloud security was a concern. How do I make sure my data is safe in the cloud? Who's accessing my data? Which really brought back into the whole model of trust again. And this is where models around zero trust emerged, where what was found out was that was important to understand identity first, and from the identity you can infer trust, and from trust you can infer security. So the cloud models really started to turbocharge the need for identity, trust, and security in order to be effective. And then what we saw later is when you're in a cloud that you're constantly under attack. Because you put yourself out there, you're going to be attacked. And so the security and identity aspects of the cloud really had to become battle hardened, really had to become proven, because you were constantly under attack. To the point where actually identity security is sometimes better done in the cloud because it is so battle hardened. So this is, I guess, the arc of the story where we talked about the cloud has really come to the mix and really starting to deliver some identity and security benefits based on trust. Another thing happened in the 2010 is people realize that identity is really valuable. To owners, it's about them, but to business, it's about intelligence. And what we started to see was this coin of a term called surveillance capitalism, where these large tech giants, in order to provide easy services, started to hoover up massive vaults of personal information that was intelligence to them, which they could sell to others. And we then lost our control of the internet. And then the internet started to feel a little bit creepy. People started to lose confidence in using the internet for spending or socializing or living a life on it. And because these large tech organizations were essentially addicted to the information, there was no way they were going to give back control. So wresting back control became a very big concern. Just like in the previous decade when things went sort of skew-whiff, luckily again, the standards bodies sort of took interest and said, actually, no, that's not good enough. And they started to think around how a better model could be used for identity. But in the early 90s, there was this concept of self-sovereign identity, where they imagined was, because this was the early 90s, you sat down at your desktop with your computer at your feet and you logged on to the internet, probably over dial-up. And instead of sharing your data over the internet, what you did would have a vault on your own personal PC that you would have control of, and that would be the arbiter of what you would share and what you wouldn't. Great idea, but it had some problems in the fact that adoption, you're not going to get everybody running your own little piece of software with an identity vault in there. Had problems around mobility. What happens when I'm not at home? What happens when I'm traveling or I'm at work? How do I take my vault with me? So it was always a great idea, but I always struggled with. But I guess around 2010, they said, yeah, remember that sovereign identity? What we really need is a computer that we carry with us everywhere, that's always on us, that we can install apps and software with us, and as a constant companion as we live our lives. And guess what? Mobility, the phone. So there was another, I guess, a big epiphany around about 2010 in terms of we have devices now to actually discover the promised land that we sort of struggled to deal with earlier on. And the idea that the standards bodies could start to use these technology convergences to improve the trust model of the internet. So that's what they did. They spent a long time, 10 years this went on, and rethinking about what does identity look like now? And currently there's, I guess, three major models. There's enterprise identity, which is when you log on to your organization as an employee. That's been around since the get-go. There's customer identity, where we log on as customers. That's really the concept of logging on over the internet. And there is also another mixture between called partner identity, where you're sharing, businesses share information amongst their business partners. What emerged is a new concept of decentralized identity, where it's a whole new privacy model that is tamper-proof and evades surveillance, and it starts to resist all the centralization flaws that we saw previously before. And its basic ethos is decentralized, but with control in the hands of the owner. So these organizations that are hoovering up massive vaults of identity data don't have that asymmetric power that they currently have. So this is where the standards bodies started to make headway. And there's a new model around identity. It's called about ownership control, where essentially what happens is, in the model, there's a thing called an issuer. An issuer could be a government agency, or it could be a bank, or even could be a university, where it can issue a credential to a person in a wallet on their phone. And that credential is cryptographically proven to be issued and is tamper-proof. And then the holder can come along and present that to a verifier, say for example a bank, to prove a level of government identity, to verify who they are. And there is some cryptographic foundations that sit underneath it that allow the verifier to prove that that credential was cryptographically issued from the issuer. And there's a whole ecosystem that spins up. So a government can issue a credential for allow a bank to know who they are. Then a bank could perhaps issue a credential for a credit agency. A driver's license authority could issue a driver's license. You could just use that to rent a car, etc., etc. So it's a very interesting model. And then I guess the control of the identity sits with the person who owns it, which allows a different thinking around the sense of centralization. You can start to envision these chains of trust where if you can have an initial foundational anchor of who you are, that, say, for example, from the government, then you can use that identity to assert who you are to university. And when you complete your studies at university, you get an academic record, and you can use that academic record to assert your academic achievements to your employer. And then if you want to get a bank loan, you can assert your employment records to the bank, plus your identity, etc., and so on. So it allows this cycle of proving who you are in a chain of trust. So it's a very sort of powerful model, but nowhere is the information owned other than the person who's holding it in their hands. So it's a very interesting model. A lot of the big tech organizations really sort of combated with this notion of decentralized because it was pretty much eroding their business models. But what we saw were some interesting things. That there were people who were for it and people who were against it. I talked a little bit before about the cloud, and the reason why I talked about that is because the cloud notion for the needing identity and security is fundamental for its success. If you can't identify secure who people are and what they can do, their business model is over. So Microsoft is actually taking a very interesting spin where they've actually invested very strongly into the identity in the cloud. They've taken I guess a leaf out the 2010s and rethought about identity, security, and rebadged the whole product stack into a thing called Entra. Now, the nice thing about Entra is it's very well used. Every time you, for example, using it right now when you're using a Teams, every time you open up a Microsoft Office document using Entra. So it's ubiquitous across the marketplace. It's trusted, and it's in use. And so what they've done is start to spin up more services around the notion of Entra identity. And we can see here a thing called Entra Verified ID. So they've actually implemented a platform that does essentially this model here. Allows you to act as an issuer, provides the ability to act as a holder, and provides the ability to act as a verifier. It's quite a powerful model, and the nice thing about it is it's actually very cost effective to run. Right now, it's for the first 50,000 per month, I think it's free. So there is a very cheap model underneath it. It's ubiquitous everywhere. It's cloud enabled, and in terms of a holder, it looks like this. There is a default one out of the box called Microsoft Authenticator. If you look in Microsoft Authenticator now, there's a thing called Verified ID. It allows you to go across here and basically have credentials in your Microsoft Authenticator wallet and present them in use cases like this. So it's there to use. I think Microsoft Authenticator is free, but you don't need to use Microsoft Authenticator. You can also build your own wallets if you want to and use SDKs. So essentially, to use the foundation is the notion of setting up your own web app that talks to Entra in your organization. The APIs are there to use, and you can do the communications with Entra and the wallet, and the lifecycle completes. So that's the thing behind it. And I guess the story there is to point out that there has been an arc of success and failure for identity security of the internet. There has been an arc of adoption of cloud. There has been an arc of putting security and identity into the cloud for very good reasons. But based on that arc of success, the notion of wallets where you can control your identity is a very interesting concept. And it's, I think, soon to become very mainstream. Realme is investing in it. We're going to see mobile driver's licenses probably using a similar form of technology. The EU is investing immensely strongly in it. We think these are going to be coming mainstream. But what's interesting is TANZ has actually been very progressive in this space. And kudos to TANZ for, I guess, really propelling, I guess, the decentralized identity landscape in New Zealand forward. That's essentially it.
Thank you, Richard, for that. And just to echo some of those comments, we can see this driven largely by the European legislative requirements for GDPR and eIDAS. So what we're seeing is Microsoft has, in a sense, adopted verifiable credentials at the heart of what they do. And in fact, if you have a Microsoft 365, Home, Business Central, you have Microsoft Entra, in a sense, at your fingertips and can issue verifiable credentials. I have a home license of Microsoft. I have issued verifiable credentials from my home license to Microsoft Authenticator. That gives you some idea of, and that's just using ClickOps via their web interface. So it's very straightforward, very simple to use. Technical barriers are low. Cost barriers are very low. There is really just a cost of deployment, but essentially it is ClickOps. But Richard's outlined very well where this has come from. What we also note is the ERP systems, Infor, SAP, and Microsoft Dynamics, all are built to utilize this type of model. And we know that SAP is adopting Entra by 2030. So in the next 5 years, they're going to hand it across to Microsoft, I think. But as well, SAP has got built into it the GDPR and eIDAS requirements because, of course, SAP is a European company. So there's technically limited barriers to deployment, minimal cost, and by way of example, we TANZ commissioned Backstory to undertake a small proof of concept pilot, and we're going to have Ian Robb from Backstory who will be demonstrating what we did to prove out that we could actually do this using Microsoft Entra, using the Entra wallet, and putting a Entra wallet inside an app. Over to you, Ian.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for that very nice introduction, Chris. Yes, so I'm Ian from Backstory, and if you haven't heard about us, we used to work across the agricultural sector, doing a whole bunch of agri-tech things. So we've got our own certification management compliance system, as well as working with some of the member companies for their farmer portals, and we're involved in the agricultural supply chain. So we were brought on in June to review Entra as a replacement for the existing wallet solution, as Sharon mentioned. And we were brought on with completely fresh set of eyes. So me personally, I've got 20 years of data integration experience with the traditional server to server or server client API approach of things. I'd never heard of verified credentials or distributed identity or any of that kind of thing before we started on this. So, but what we managed to do within a month was turn around a pretty quick demonstration of the proof of concept and showing how it all works. So let's see, hopefully that works. Yeah, so we're brought on to just to give us feasibility and our own third-party expertise into using Entra Stack for this, and build a little minimum viable product using the Entra system to replace that existing demo. And most importantly for everyone on this call, we built a whole bunch of documentation for other developers and technical people who want to implement this or who want to roll it out or use it or just get an understanding of it as well. So the Entra already has a lot of great docs out there, but we sort of took it further specific to this pilot. Yeah, so as mentioned, there was an existing proof of concept that we sort of had familiarity with. We'd been demoed that to try and get the concept across to us before we endeavored on this. And yeah, so the approach between the existing proof of concept and Entra is fairly similar. There's QR codes that you scan from your phone in order to share data from your phone with a website. The old one was blockchain based and but hard to implement, but was well received by farmers, as Joan mentioned, and yeah, had a very similar kind of look and feel to the Authenticator app as Richard demonstrated. So you'd have the app there on the left, you'd scan the code on the right, and that would show all of the data coming through there. Yeah, so we're looking at Entra as a feasible option for this. What we were shown was that verified credentials was all based on open standards of W3C, as Chris mentioned, but this was all done using did web, which is without that blockchain side of things, and is all like getting closer towards that a middle ground between the traditional web-based REST APIs and that kind of thing. But it's still a very complex landscape out there, so there's a lot of stuff that you need to implement if you're going to implement this yourself, but it's all possible. The whole distributed thing, meaning you don't have to use Entra if you don't want to, but if you did, you'd have to go down the path of doing domain lookups for well-known files. You'd have to handle certificates, rotations, revocations, rotations, and then the actual verification process itself, which is again certificate-based authentication and that kind of thing. So it's not impossible, but Entra came along and made that really simple with pretty much two APIs, two REST APIs that a traditional REST web developer like myself could understand and get my head around. So yeah, as mentioned, there's heaps and heaps of docs there, maybe almost too many docs. It's quite overwhelming. So we've got our own docs as part of the TANZ system now to steer things down a bit more of a logical path if you're trying to roll this out. So Entra handles everything for us, which is really nice. It generates all of the JSON web tokens. It handles all the certificates and rotations and expiries and checking and things. And very nicely, it can generate QR codes if we want them to, so we don't have to implement that as a library on our websites. And it creates OpenID URLs, which I'll give a demonstration shortly. The data, when it comes back, so when we ask for data from the app, it comes back through a separate webhook, which was a little bit of a gotcha, but again, it's all standard stuff for a traditional API dev like myself to get my head around. And yeah, as mentioned it so many times before, so far it has been free, so we haven't encountered any costs with doing this. Both Chris and myself have set up free versions of Entra and given this a try, and it all works fine out of the box. So even if you're not using Entra, yeah, there's no sort of hurdles there. And it did have a nice to have. So most of what we're talking about here is exchanging information, but if you want to use it more like a presenting a driver's license kind of thing and proving that you are who you say you are, they've got a face check verification process that's built into the same verified identity system. That's not free, it's like 25 cents per check, but it's nice to know that that's an option there if any member wants to use that. Oh, and of course, because it's all open standards as well, there are other providers. So there's no kind of lock-in with Entra. If you want to start with that, with the simple APIs, implement this, then you can either roll over to a different provider or implement it all yourself. I will pray to the live demo gods very shortly, but I'll just give sort of an overview of how this kind of works from the user side of things. So whenever we're interacting with a verified credential, the kickoff is always either a URL or URI, the OpenID that you can tap on from your phone, or if you're using it from a website, you can scan it in remotely with a QR code. So me as a happy user on a existing website, I want to generate a verified credential, and the website will send off key value pairs off to Entra using the issuance API. Entra comes back with a nice little QR code that we then present to the user. They then scan in with their phone. And so they scan into their phone, and then that will end up on their phone. So if I cross my fingers and hold my tongue just the right way, I am going to attempt to share my screen of a live demo. Is that coming through okay? Hopefully it is. So what we have is just like a little prototype website. So I've got a few different example prototypes there. And on the right-hand side is a live instance of my phone. Oops. Oh dear. Typical. Stop. Good. So yes, as Richard mentioned, we've got this verified IDs button down the bottom right here. And probably most people don't actually use this button, but if you do, we can tap through to that and we'll see a whole bunch of cards presented. So as the farmer or user, I could then tap the little scanny button here and scan the QR code that would be presented on the website. And in this case, I've created a fake NCAP score verified credential. And so I could then add that into my wallet on my phone. And now now I have an offline copy of that credential, of that data effectively stored on my phone. Yeah, completely randomized, so it's all garbage data. But and we can see that it was issued and certified by a particular party. So in my case, I have a separate external ID Entra system. This is the free one that we set up for the purposes of this. We can also see where it came from and who we've shared that data with as the user. So I'm just going to jump back into the PowerPoint, and it's probably going to kick me off from the beginning again, isn't it? It is indeed. So that's to get the data into the wallet. To get it out of the wallet and back into another website, it's a very similar kind of flow. So we have that same kickoff with a QR code. There we go. That the happy website user will, the website will say, I'm actually wanting to get a particular piece of information. So the website will say, for example, I want to get some NCAP score information from the farmer's wallet. So it sends off a REST request for presentation to Entra. Entra comes back and says, okay, here's the QR code for the farmer to scan in to present that information. The website will show that QR code. The farmer scans that in, and then they confirm which credential they want to share, and then information gets passed through to Entra, and Entra will pass that verified information back through a nice webhook back to our website. And there's nonce kind of data in there that you can make sure that the request that's coming back from the webhook is the same as what's being pushed through. You can say, these are the headers I need to respond back with, kind of traditional webhook kind of things to prove who you are. So I am going to hold my tongue yet again. Demo number 2, presentation. Let's just reload that in case it's expired. So these QR codes, they only last for a few minutes, as it mentions here in the demo. So I am going to request data from the farmer from my website. And the farmer's then asked, what do you want to share? In this case, we're after an NCAP score. So we've specifically said what the type of data is. In my case, I've got 2 different sources of that NCAP score, the one we just scanned in before, as well as one from previous. So if I then provide that NCAP score and share it with the website, it'll come through and show, well, this is the data that came through, which should match up. 66 is my score with the start and end dates. Cool, they match up. Whew, demo worked. Success. And let's jump back again. Oh, someone's got their hand up. Hi, Chris.
Oh, sorry, that was a mistake. I just wanted to say well done.
Thanks.
A live demo. Well done. It's always nerve-wracking.
Oh, there's more. There's more room for.
I was trying to clap. Raise my hand. I'll lower it.
We'll raise our hand. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So to show what that actually might look like in a real world situation, rather than just sort of boring white background demo systems, we built it into our Prove solution. So our backstories, certification management, compliance, that utility, and the idea. This video is on a loop, which is why I'm not going to jump into it until I've described it a bit. But the idea is that a farmer would be logged into their credential management system, and they'd want to save that credential onto their device. And so this is kind of like the end-to-end kind of demo of that going on. So as the farmer, I've clicked that I want to download the verified credential. The website's then exchanging that information with Entra, which presents back the QR code. The farmer then scans that in, and then boop, there's our Prove demo credential, and that should have the certificate that we've got there of our certification of our verified farm. Let that run through one more time, why not? So then the farmer could then proceed to use that for presenting to the bank or insurance, or to whoever needs that information for their certification for their farm in this case. Oop. Yeah. So in terms of what types of data that we can share around with this system, we've got what we call ID token hints, which is that key value pair. This is all key value pair kind of information, but the ID token hints is probably what most people are going to want to use on this call, which is when you've got an existing website, such as with Prove, or you've got your own member portal, and you want to be able to save that information onto the farmer's wallet for them to share around with other members, or present back again, you'd use that ID token hints. And yeah, so the demo for that was basically the same as just that demo before, where we're scanning in that NCAP random scores. Similar to that, there's what's called ID tokens, which is built into the actual authentication process. So I don't have a good demo for that because it's really not the best user experience, but it does give it like an extra level of security. So if you've watched this and you've got a security hat on, you saw those QR codes pop up and you're thinking, well, I could scan that in with my phone. You're absolutely right. Anyone could grab that credential. You don't necessarily know that data belongs to the person who's got that data. Just like if I stole a driver's license of someone, it's a verified driver's license, but I'm not the same person. So doing an ID token means they have to go through an extra step of logging into the portal, into the OAuth system, and then as part of the OAuth response, you'd add in some extra custom identifiers with that extra wallet information, that same key value pairs. So it adds two or three extra steps to that user flow, which is not the best. But if you need that extra verification to prove that who has the data is the person who the data belongs to, then that's the way to go. Presentation. So that's a good one to show off, actually. So for a presentation, I'm not sharing my screen. That would help. Pop out of the way there. And reload as well. So a presentation is what we saw before, where I have an existing card, existing wallet item that I want to share. And in this case, I've got a verified employee credential and I'm going to use that verified credential to generate a new verified credential. So similar to that presentation, but instead of presenting it back to the website as a webhook, it then gets saved into the wallet as a new credential that I can use later on. So you could then pick out specific information out of that credential. So I could pull out the email and photo and name, and so I can reuse parts of that credential. Doesn't seem super useful, but where it gets useful is probably in the next step. No, 2 steps ahead. That's all. Is when you can combine multiple credentials together. So I'm jumping back into the slides. So for the multiples, so I could say I want to create a TANZ credential that's based on my NCAP score and my greenhouse gas score. I can merge them together into a single new credential that has that both that information together. Cool. See you later. The last little bit, number 4 here, so self-issued. So that's for fields that the user themselves is entering when they're creating that credential. So this is stuff that doesn't necessarily need to be verified. So this might be useful for things like if you say, you want the person to put in their contact phone number or an email address, or to say, I accept the terms of use of this particular credential, that kind of idea. So something that's not necessarily issued by a website that the user can key in, but will be baked into that verified credential and signed off by the website to say that that's part of that tamper-proof. So yeah, kind of like doing like a signature kind of idea on the driver's license. So if you've already got Entra and you're wanting to give this a go, first thing you'll need to do is you want to set up an enterprise application, pretty standard for Entra side of things. So you'll need to set it up for OAuth and give it permission to issue and create verified credentials. So we've got all this documented, and Entra has it all documented as well. As it says, optionally, you can use Entra External for this. So you can do it with your standard Entra system, and but you can use it with Entra External. You might want to do that if you want to have a separate system for your devs to have access to without touching your membership system, or if you're already using like B2C or Entra External ID for your member management. But again, you don't need to do that. Verifying your domain is also useful. Again, that's completely optional. The benefit of verifying your domain is that you'll have that little signed off at the bottom there saying issued by. So for example, in our demos, we had issued by Trust Alliance or by Backstory. If you don't verify your domain, then you need to go through a process of setting up an Azure subscription with certificates that you can manually maintain and rotate yourself. But if you've verified the domain, then Entra will handle that all for you, and you don't have to worry about any kind of certificate management or anything like that. And there's just one less thing to have to worry about. And then finally, there's a little option to enable the verified ID. And once you've confirmed that you want to enable a verified ID across your system, it gives you a default credential that all of your users will have, all of your employees, who are using Entra will have out of the box. So if they go to the My Account page on Microsoft, they will get a little blue link that says Get My Verified ID. You tap on that and it will pop up with the QR code and scan in, and it will say that you are a verified employee of your particular company. So the other parts of setting this up, so once you've got the Entra verified credential ID system all set up, you want to start making those individual credentials. It's sort of a low code, no code kind of system to do that. You would set up what's called a presentation, which is what the card kind of looks like, what the information that you want to have in it is, and sort of the friendly presentation for that. So, I'm sure you can all read that, but yeah, we've got colors, we've got what it is, descriptions, we've got information about what pops up when the farmer or the user is scanning that. So you can provide some additional context about why that credential is wanted or why it's being presented. And then the fields coming through from that credential in their raw form and how you want to present them. And so for this, for example, comes looking like this. So this is the example one that we had before. So we've got the logo and the colors and matching our theme. So you can have multiple cards set up. So you might have one for proof of compliance. You might do a separate one for proof of address. That's for us at least. And then you might have another one separately for the actual data you want to share. So you could set up multiple of these verified credentials within Entra. You don't just have to have one. The other half of the setup is the rules setup. So this is how it takes that information either from an existing wallet, or whether in the case of ID token hints, if you've got the existing website, what the fields are that are going to be populated through and how they're going to be saved into that verified credential. So my website might have it in snake case, but the credential wants to have it in camel case. Required is whether it's a required field or not. So obviously some things are not necessarily compulsory for some of these credentials. And indexed is an interesting one. It's kind of separate to this, but you can search credentials across the network. And if you say that there's an index field, then for example, that might be a farm ID number or a user email address or something like that, something that you would search on to find the rest of that information. So you could say, show me all the NCAP scores that are in the network for this particular farmer. And the other little bit that's at the bottom, so crop it off, which is very important, is the type of data that, the type of credential that this is. And if you know JSON, then you know that this is an array. So you can say that this is multiple different types of data if you want to. So you could say this is an NCAP score based on the TANZ schema, or if there's some international NCAP. Okay, NCAP's not a great example, but you know, if there were another like ISO standards for nitrogen caps, then you could say that was that different type. So you could say that a credential matches multiple types, and that also is really good if you're doing a credential that merges two credentials together, because you can then say that your new credential can work as either one of those source credentials, so you can then represent that later on down the track. So yeah, as mentioned, this type is kind of what members need to know to be able to share that data with each other and to be able to have like a common agreed upon schema. So that's where TANZ really steps in, is setting that schema and that definition of all the data that is needed for one person to share data with another, and to know that if I have an NCAP score type, then I know that it's going to have a period start date like this, and it's going to have NCAP score like this. Or we've got other fields in there. So we've got GeoJSON or address and that kind of thing. So Trust Alliance is coming up with all of those schemas through a presentation definition or JSON PD format, which is presented. It'll be like as a URL with that information in a JSON format of guaranteed field names and the data types and descriptions and that kind of thing, so that all of the member companies, if you're in the network, can agree upon what data we're sharing around with each other. So in terms of what's available for the end user, we've been demoing a lot with the Microsoft Authenticator, but that's not the only option that we have as an end user. So there are other verified credential apps out there that don't work the same, but it's a very similar approach. They're all, you know, standards based, so they all kind of like interop with each other. But we've got three kind of options that we investigated as part of this pilot. So that's using Microsoft Authenticator as a first step. So which means that Microsoft's looking after it and making sure that this works and is up to date. But Microsoft also publish their the libraries that they are using within Microsoft Authenticator for verified credentials. So if you want to embed it yourself, or as we were experimenting was building a TANZ app, you can use that with the same support of what's available within Microsoft Authenticator. So the upsides of Microsoft Authenticator is that it's supported by Microsoft, but of course you can't customize it. So those little credential cards are what you see is what you get. You're not going to be able to say, promote your logos bigger, or yeah, if you want to have anything else that's a bit more flashy looking, some of the other apps out there could potentially provide that. But so that is there. But so we were looking at it from the TANZ app point of view, which we could then focus to specific member companies to be able to push updates in terms of like revocations or requests for presentations of the credentials. And also we're investigating like selective disclosure. So rather than showing the entire credential to a provider, you might only want to show like a specific bit. Like you might only want to show your NCAP score. You don't want to give away your email address and name or something like that. So giving a bit more control to the farmer or the user to be able to do that. And then embedding. So if you've already got an app, which I know a few of the member companies do, and you want to embed a wallet within that, so that you have a whole end user out of the box experience, then that's available as well, so that there isn't a separate app for farmers to download if they don't want to do that. And of course, it means it's independent. So, if TANZ go away or Entra goes away, then you can run that completely independently of that. So if you are looking at embedding it, so as I say, Microsoft completely support it, and they publish the code for that on their GitHub. They've got Android and iOS app libraries available, and that will provide you with all the information that you need to present a verified credential yourself. The downside of the wallet code that they provide is that it's very minimal. It doesn't provide anything for display or for doing any QR code scanning, so you'd need to implement a camera library in there as well if you don't already have one, and you'd also need to try and use their presentation JSON formatting to display it in a nice way, and without that it kind of looks like this, which I mean, it's functional, it works, and it's a great sort of proof of concept. But again, yeah, it's not the prettiest. So after implementing all of that, running through all of the proof of concepts and coming out from the other side of, what is verified credentials? I've never heard of this before. After a month of kind of working with it, I got a bit more of appreciation for it. I know the other guys have covered all this already, but it really didn't kind of struck home about what a verified credential was until I got the idea that it's a tamper-proof piece of paper. So it's like a driver's license or a passport or a certification from a university that someone else hasn't just scribbled my name out and put another name on in crayon or whatever. But at the same time, that person who's holding it isn't the same person who it's for. So I could steal my wife's driver's license and go and try and take it somewhere, but that they need to confirm that who I am and stuff like that. I felt as a developer who's used to the server-to-server kind of APIs, that there was sort of a higher barrier for the user, which, according to the pilot, didn't really affect the farmers, especially when they felt like they had more control over their data. So I felt like there was a higher user barrier, but I could see that the actual development barrier, instead of having to do server to server, I could just write a single server, a single client API connection, and then that data could be shared and presented back to me, rather than me having to implement it to this provider and this provider and this provider, and they're also implementing it with each other and creating a big nested web. So rather than doing that, just to implement one more thing, which of course, obligatory XKCD comic of, yeah, there's now another standard. But yeah, I could definitely see the benefit for that from a development point of view. And I think the other thing that really didn't strike me until kind of seeing how other people were using it, this is a model that the UN has provided of supply chains using verified credentials and using all of the DID Web and W3C certifications and standards process, and they are using that as their example for how to use supply chain, sharing that information all the way along the supply chain in a way that doesn't involve server to server without cross borders and everything like that. And it wasn't until I kind of saw this approach and realized that, okay, maybe this is a bit bigger than just implementing a server to server API, and has a lot more power going forward in terms of empowering not just the data providers and users, but the actual people and packages that are coming along the way through that trade route and supply chain. And yeah. Yeah. So thanks everyone for that. I think we're opening up to question time.
Thank you very much, Ian. That was a very quick but thorough walk through a short, sharp, sweet project that we did to show that verifiable credentials can be issued relatively simply from existing technology stacks that members have using a wallet which is free. So therefore, it indicates, and just to reiterate this point, the amount of documentation and support material that Microsoft Entra has online in online tutorials is amazing. A very good, thorough coverage of the topic, relatively straightforward to do from home, even for me to do it to my Microsoft Authenticator wallet using very limited programming skills. Are there any questions from any members? And look, just be aware that no question at this stage is it could be considered in any way ridiculous or silly. So don't be shy.
And Chris, while everyone's thinking about their questions, I just want to point out that in terms of our milestone, and thank you to Janet for being on the call, we have created, and you say there's a lot of information online, but you've also done a lot of how-to guides. So we've created this kind of a pre-production environment along with Richard and Ian to understand and to help our members actually easily get into this. So we are singing from there are no technical barriers to entry. Technology's there. It is to all intents and purposes free if you're a Microsoft user, and we can show you how to do it. And this is how Dave said to jump off, but really taking it forward is members projects now, helping us with getting our members interested in doing projects that we can help them with all of our learnings and IP from this pilot project. There's a question from Nick.
Oh, Ryan, over to you. Yeah, Ryan first, and then I'll deal with Nick's question.
Yeah, no worries. I'm just asking a question. So you talk about the Entra ID and the identity there. So from the farmer's perspective, are they required to have an Entra-based ID? Say, for instance, they're a Gmail user or something like that. So it's solely all sitting in the TANZ space. There's no requirement for them to be using anything other than the Microsoft Authenticator app. Just verifying that that's the case.
Only the app. Yeah. And so, cool. Yeah, from a farmer, we looked at also how many people have got Microsoft Authenticator. It's quite pervasive. So if you're looking at farmers, we were quite surprised, 50% Apple, 50% Android, which was, I think, a little bit unusual. but we saw no, and Sharon can talk to this, putting on a wallet was a bit of, downloading a wallet from an app store was a bit of a drama, wasn't it, Sharon?
Only if you're an Apple user. Sorry, I'm an Android user, but yeah, no, it wasn't. We got, look, in our farmer focus group, we got the farmers that wanted to be in the group because it was, they came to us. So we had the early adopters, apart from some of the federated farmers presidents. But so yeah, we did have the kind of the early adopters, but it wasn't a problem for them to follow the instructions. And also the other thing, sorry, while you're thinking about that, Ryan, it's also not only that the Authenticator that they have got access to it, and Janet and I did that for Janet, put Authenticator on for her, but also that they might not need Authenticator because we might be able to piggyback off a Silver Fern Farms app or a My Balance app so that you don't have this proliferation of other wallets. So that's what MS Entra gives us as well.
So we've got yeah, thank you, Sharon. Ryan, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. I just wanted to validate that because obviously there's different levels of technical prowess and knowledge out in the rural environment. So just understanding what the barrier there would be for the end users.
So we've got a question from Nick Conlon. Does the Entra system provide an access log for parties? Oh, and I think it's just been answered by Richard. So Nick Conlon asked question, does the Entra system provide an access log for parties accessing the credentials? And I think you mean using them in a presentation. If you're an organization that issues a VC, and this is Richard's answer, or receives presentations of a VC, then Entra provides logs of what the organization sent and received. Yeah, but there's no cross-audit log, and that's the key bit of decentralization. So when you receive a verifiable credential, you'll know. When you issue it, you know, but the holder, their activity is not being tracked. There's no cookie in there that can track the wallet activity unless you engineered it that way. Maybe looking at it, you could you engineer that there was a reference for each type? I suppose you could track the app.
Yes,
possibly,
yes, you could. Yes, you could
Yeah.
do some phone home, ET phone home design, but you'd be severely circumventing the whole privacy model of why you're doing it.
Yeah.
So,
Nick, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it was more of a use case thing, and perhaps also to just check Eon's point around, a rogue driver's license being in the field, who used it, how many people used it, how many times does it get resold. But mine was more of a use case question in terms of the verifiable credential being able to travel as part of a market object. So if we take like a scope 3, credential, and it can go from the farm where it's generated or issued, and then it can go through multiple parties who all take that verified credential to be part of their own assessment for their disclosure reporting. And then, Richard, the idea would be that you're not disestablishing the privacy of the holder of the credential, but you're allowing that issuing party to see how many people benefited from having access to that data. And that's I guess, the point of having a log.
Yeah, the data model supports that. Like the VC data model is quite extensible, so you can wrap VCs and VCs as you want to, and it's especially useful with a lot of the data models are set up around the notion of personal privacy. But if it is just data that you're sharing and it isn't really privacy sensitive, then it definitely eases that conversation as well. So
yeah, it's kind of like I gave you a special number. How many times did you hand that special number to somebody, and how many people benefited from getting that special number? And that has market value, being able to know that. And I'm just swapping special number out for verified credential, but it amounts to the same purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
you need to go backwards to the train and work it all out, because it is by design not allowing the issuer to be pulled back to in the chain. That's one of its key purposes.
Yeah.
there are currently some models that are being commercialized that do exactly what you're proposing, Nick. There's a company in California called Doc who just launched something exactly like that, but it's using a blockchain to travel back on, whereas the DID web method goes to a DNS server. It can be used in DID chains, DID web. So the diagram that Ian put up from UNECE and the paper, the full paper is available online off the TANZ website. I'll put a link to it where he got that graphic from. It talks specifically about DID chains, decentralized identified chains, moving down a supply chain. And there are models arriving for that. So the short answer is yes, you can engineer that if it's as what we call DID chains or supply chains. At the moment, we're just going from the holder to the relying inside a network, but once it moves down a chain, that's a different technical question. I know Richard has experimented a little bit in this space, and there's a company called Transmute out of the US that does this super easy out of the box for certificates of origins, and that's integratable, I think, with some of the ERP, with SAP. So they're doing this sort of thing for ERPs for supply chains. Transmute uses, I think, did web, Richard, doesn't it?
Yeah, from memory,
Yeah,
you
from
set up your
memory,
own.
they use a did
It's
web method.
really cool. You set up your own organization within Transmute and allows you to transact with other organizations and exchange products and shipments, but you also can see a chain of what was sent where. So it's a very different model, but the VC data model is there to be extended upon. So if you can imagine those use cases, then all power to you.
And from a business perspective, sorry to interrupt, that was what we kind of parked as the product wallet. So we were just focusing on the digital farm wallet in the first instance, but then that would build up into a product wallet, which could travel with the product, the VCs that would travel with the product.
Yeah, so spot on. Thanks, Sharon, for summarizing that. Yeah, that's what we call the product wallet. This is the farm wallet, which gives you the point of origination. So it gives you the trust anchor. It might be a property title. It might be an individual's identity check, which validates the identity of the person, or an organizational identity check like NZBN or a company's number, or it might be an NZFAT number or membership number or something like that. And then as the goods move down the chain, which contain the scope 3 measurements, that's what we call a product wallet, to give it a name. And that's, Richard, I know you've played around with doing sort of what Transmute is doing.
Yeah, we have demo environments I was kicking around with, and it's just really using the same technology. And essentially all you're doing is just wrapping a VC with another VC, so you can have that sort of chain of VCs passed around. And it's the model where it's not privacy data, it is actually data you want to share, and it's about a thing. So you're not too sensitive about who it's about, it's just about a thing. So product wallets, Transmute, very interesting.
Yeah. And just to go back to that issue of the driver's license, DIA have made contact with me yesterday saying they've got a sandbox for identity check using verifiable credentials, and they wanted to know if Trust Alliance wanted to experiment with a sandbox for verifiable credentials for identity checks. So perfect timing. So we'll come back and look at possibly linking, and this goes to the comment about, I think it was from you, Nick, about regional councils adopting this. But if DIA has got identity check for an individual, then that means that can go into the farm wallet. And as well, they're also playing with delegated authority models in that wallet. So if a farmer got got an identity check which is linked to a farm location, which he could then, or she could, delegate authority to another party to act on their behalf for a presentation. That's another sort of step in this technology. So
trust anchor.
Yeah, so Richard, you've had some discussions with DIA and this
Yeah.
verifiable credential sandbox.
Yeah, so
wanna-
we're just trying to ascertain if it is compatible with Entra wallets. And on the tin, all the standards they're using is what Entra's using, because everyone's using the same standard, which is good. So it looks promising, but we still need to validate that. But essentially what it is setting up that trust anchor of a core identity that is government issued, and then you can build on top of that. But there's some very interesting things going on around that space. Ian talked about showing how he could issue a verified employee credential just by going to Entra and going, turn this on, which is interesting because what Microsoft's done, something quite clever, is that if you have an Entra system where you have employees in there or people in there that you've already identity proofed, you have their photo, you know who they are, you can just turn that on, and the identity proofing you have of the people in your organization can be used to issue verifiable credentials to that as that trust anchor, and then you can build on top of that.
Yeah.
So there was something quite subtle going on there that was, unless you really think about it, there's other ways around waiting for realme for this to happen.
Yeah,
It does
and this-
address the bootstrapping issue that
Yeah, it
we
does.
Yeah.
It's quite clever.
Yeah.
Deceptively
this
clever.
trust, yeah, and sorry to jump in here. This term that we're using here, called a trust anchor, is fundamentally critical, because you have to, in the background, have it anchored to something that gives you a legal framework in which you're operating, i.e. proof of identity from Department of Internal Affairs, DIA, proof of title, say from LINZ, or proof of accreditation to a quality assurance mark from a recognised authority, i.e. NZFAP, New Zealand Farm Assurance Program, or in the case of issuing a Scope 3 measure, it would have to be an entity that was met a particular standard and audit requirements for issuing that particular Scope 3 emission. So technically what we've been experimenting with, just to update some of the other parties on the call, is a number of core credentials: farm identity, individual identity, nitrogen / water quality, biodiversity, and greenhouse gas / carbon / Scope 3 metrics measurements. So those are the data schemas that we've been engineering in order to get standardization, which Ian referred to. There's no point sharing data if you don't have some standards, just quietly. It just does not work. So mashing a blunt API to API does not solve underlying issues unless there's a common ontological framework that you're using and common metadata standards that you're using. If you don't have that, it's not going to work, which is something we'll start to look at inside TANZ. Right, 1:30 we're coming up to. Perfect timing, guys. Well done for staying on time and sticking to the agenda. Brilliant. That's excellent. Hey, look, are there any final questions before we sign off at 1:30? It's 1:29. I can't believe we're on time, especially given my propensity to talk. Are there any final questions? Look, I'd really like to thank Sharon for managing this project so efficiently and effectively as we've gone along this period. We've reached a really cool point, which is the tech is out there, it's deployable, we have a productionization path that has mitigated barriers, we've got standards ready to deploy. My thanks to Richard for your very good overview of trust and issues to do with identity and security. And my thanks to Ian for showing how someone completely new to this field can, in a matter of 4 weeks or so, deliver something effectively demonstrable that will work in the marketplace and is scalable. So my thanks to everyone. And lastly, please watch out. We'll publish this video on our YouTube channel. We'll put it on the website. We'll put it out in the newsletter, and we'll make sure that the PowerPoints presented are available to everyone to utilize inside your organizations. Again, if you've got questions, reach out to us, reach out to anyone who's been on this call. Keep the dialogue going. Okay, we'll call an end there. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Ka
everyone.
kite anō, mate wā,
Thanks,
travel
folks.
safely in this weather.